The common denominator between all great drummers, I think, is the fact that they can all groove and they can all function well within their group settings. You know, obviously a lot of guys are noted for, you know, certain soloing things or whatever that they may be capable of doing, but, you know, their primary function within a band is to be able to keep good solid time. And I think this is most prevalent in rock music, you know, because the most important thing about rock drumming is it's not what you play, but it's how you play it. It's the attitude and the energy and the conviction that you convey while you're playing it. And that brings to mind another important factor with rock drumming, and that is the subject of dynamics. Okay, so let me demonstrate something for you very quickly here. This is a basic quarter note oriented groove that I'm sure we've all heard 1,000 times before. And I'll just play it the regular, like, lame way for you so you can hear how it goes. It goes like this. Okay, that's tired, right? So what can we do to really make this happen, to make this groove come along? Now, here's where dynamics really play an important role, okay? To start with, you know, I guess the first thing I should mention is the importance of the proper range of motion when playing rock music, okay? You gotta pick up the sticks, you gotta dig in a little bit, you know? It's like, because this is what's appropriate for the music. If you were studying with a classical snare drum guy, he'd probably talk about, you know, well, keep your sticks approximately 3 inches, you know, from the snare drum head when you're performing, because, you know, you're working with an orchestra or something. Here you're dealing with walls of amps on either side, so I think 3 feet is more like the proper range of motion. So let's go back to this groove idea, and let's start with what we can do, like for instance on the hi-hat, to make this pattern come alive a little bit more. Okay, I was doing regular eighth notes, but what I'll do now is just accentuate the downbeat. Okay, so if we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, I'll accent all the downbeats. So we have this now. Okay, now with the snare drum, let me show you what we call a rim shot. Here's where you have half of the stick on the rim, the other half on the head. Okay, and then you just lay into it. Okay, so from back here, you should get this like concussive effect, all right? Because again, this is what's appropriate for the music. For the bass drum, you just got to rear back and fire. I mean, sometimes I find myself putting my entire body weight into it, you know. Oftentimes at my drum clinics, guys will say, well, hey Bobby, you know, do you use the heel down or the heel up technique, you know? I say I use the leg up and the body forward technique. Really make the drum sing. Okay, so now let me go back to this pattern, and incidentally I call this the power groove. See if you can hear the difference. Okay, now if you notice, another thing that I tried to incorporate there as well is a little bit of body motion. Okay, because I found that by just, you know, getting your body involved a little bit, it kind of helps to reinforce the consistency of the pocket. So this is something else to keep in mind. Okay, now I'd like to introduce the element of syncopation. Now, syncopation is what you'll probably be most familiar with in a lot of the funk music situations. Basically, what we're going to do is take like some basic kick and snare patterns, you know, rock-oriented patterns, and just by shifting the notes around a little bit within the measure, you create this syncopated feel. Okay, let me explain. Typically, you'd count like a 4/4 measure of rock with 16th notes like this: 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Okay, those E and does represent the other parts of the beat. So with syncopation, you just simply accentuate those other parts of the beat rather than always just the downbeat. Okay, so let me play for you just a basic, simple rock pattern first. Okay, now with just a couple of minor changes, we can turn that groove into a syncopated one. All right? So to break it down very slow, what I just did was this. Okay, let's take the snare drum on beat number 2 and just kind of move it up one part of the beat there to the of 1. So now we'll have this. So now I'll notice that there's nothing on beat number 2. So by accentuating one of the offbeats and taking the natural strong beat out of there from the snare drum, it creates the syncopated element. Okay, now on beat number 3, let's move the bass drum off of beat number 3 to the E of 3. So we're moving it off the beat and we're accentuating one of the off notes there. So we'll have this. All right, now to complete the pattern, let's go ahead and give them the downbeat on beat number 4, but let's give them a 1 at the very end of it. So we got 4E and a 1. So now you'd have this. All right, now I'll go back to the original pattern. I'll play that, the slamming way with the 8th notes, and then I'll throw in the new syncopated rhythm and see if you can feel the difference. Okay, now I'd like to show you some ideas involving ostinatos with the patterns. Okay, an ostinato is a repeated musical figure. Okay, for instance, let me give you an example. Say you had an 8th note and 2 16th notes. Okay, so in this case we're doing with 1 beat ostinatos, so it would sound like this. Okay, you could also have 2 16s and an 8. It would sound like this. Or maybe you could have, like, say, upbeat 8th notes, like 1, 2, 3, 4. So what this concept involves is the application of that kind of a hi-hat part while you're still doing the various kick and snare patterns. So this is something that you could apply in your own musical situation. Okay, so let's take our same pattern and let's try the 8th note with the 2 16ths on top of it there. Okay, now at this point, let me go ahead and introduce the concept of 4-way independence. Okay, so far we're dealing with 3-way independence, right? We got your right hand on the hi-hat, left hand on the snare, and then your kick. Now we're going to pull the right hand over here to the right cymbal, and our left foot is going to act as a timekeeper as well, just by playing on the hi-hat. So let's change it up a bit. I'll play the 2 16ths and 8th note pattern over here. And we'll have quarter notes on the hi-hat, and then I'll perform the same kick and snare part. Okay, now I'd like to talk a little bit about linear ideas. Part of the whole, Metalmorphosis concept has to do with like building that arsenal of drum techniques, that old bag of tricks. So when you find yourself in a musical situation where you're asked to create something maybe unique sounding, you'll have that bag of tricks to draw from. And this is one of my favorite things about linear ideas. They're very unique sounding. Probably the singularly most unique aspect of the linear patterns is the fact that nothing will hit together at the same time. Okay, like you won't have a hi-hat and snare together. You won't have like a hi-hat and kick drum together. Kick and snare, nothing hits together at the same time. So probably the best way for me to describe this to you would be to imagine a measure of 16th notes. So you have like, 1 E and a, 2 E and a. Okay, now all you got to do is just assign a different voice on the drums to each one of those various notes. Okay, and the 3 voices in question here for now will be the hi-hat, kick, and snare. Okay, so think about our string of 16th notes, and let's take, for instance, the same kick and snare part we've had all along, which is, Okay, now we're just going to fill in the missing 16th note on the hi-hat. So very slowly, okay, let's think about our 16ths right here. They sound like this. Okay, so then up to tempo you'd have this. Okay, now let me demonstrate a linear phrase over a longer stretch of time here. Let's take maybe a 4-bar idea. I'll play it for you very slowly, and just think about the 16th notes and how each note gets its own separate voice on the kit. Let's have something like this. Okay, let me play that a little bit slower for you. Okay, now up to tempo, it sounds like this. Okay, now let's take some of the ideas that we've had thus far, some of the one-beat ostinato ideas and some of the linear ideas, and I'll give you an example about how you can combine some of the different techniques to create a sort of composite pattern. All right, let's start off with a simple 2-bar pattern between the kick and snare, and I'll play 8th notes for you just so you can hear what the groove will sound like. Okay, let's take the first measure of that pattern and incorporate some different one-beat ostinatos per every beat. So very slowly, what we'd have on the hi-hat would be this. Okay, now with the kick and snare part, you'd sound like this. Okay, now on the second measure, let's linearize the first 3 beats, and then on beat number 4, we'll just have an open quarter note hi-hat, so it would sound like this. Okay, so very slowly it would sound like this. Now, one final thing we can do to the pattern is incorporate some various hi-hat embellishments. So what I'll do is I'll play the pattern once again for you, both bars, very slowly, and demonstrate where we can open and close the hi-hat at specific areas, just to give it a different kind of flavor. Okay? 3, 4. Okay, now up to tempo, it sounds like this. I first got into Latin drumming when I was studying at the Berklee School of Music in Boston, and my teacher there, Ed Kaspic, took me through a lot of the traditional as well as the contemporary Latin concepts, and I found that this benefited me in 2 ways. Number 1, it gave me a great deal of 4-way independence, and number 2, it gave me a wide variety of rhythmic ideas and textures to incorporate into my playing. The biggest challenge in Latin drumming is the fact that you have to pretty much emulate an entire percussion section. Okay, so let me demonstrate this by showing you the traditional samba pattern.